Good evening, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about mission scenario training in the UH-60 Mike aircraft qualification course. Just like I always tell you guys, this video is one video of many throughout the series I'm doing on Black Hawks and flight school in general. So I just want to make you all aware of that. If you haven't watched my videos previously, I urge you to go back and watch those. Just in case, I don't want you guys to be lost on just randomly stumbling onto this video. If you're a flight school student, just trying to familiarize yourself with the next phase you have, this is great, and this is perfect for you. But people who are unfamiliar with flight school, it will benefit them to go back and watch prior videos. So let's get into it, guys. This phase of training, you're in MSTs, mission scenario training. This is going to be very similar to BWS. Just like in BWS, you're training for a mission set, right? You would get into Lakota, you would have a mission in your kneeboard packet, and you would go fly it and accomplish it that day. Well, you're doing that again, but this time you're in the Black Hawk, and you're trying to master the systems of the UH-60 Mike to be able to use it to accomplish the Black Hawk's mission sets, mainly being air assault and medevac. You'll do multi-ship in this phase as well. As long as they haven't changed it, you had already done that in BWS, and you're going to do that again here in MSTs. So another cool thing about this phase, there is no check ride in this phase. So the hour breakdown for this phase is going to be 9.1 aircraft hours and then 1.5 simulator hours for a total of 10.6 for the phase. So since there's no check ride and there's no academics or anything in this phase, I'm just going to give you guys my experience of MSTs. So you really learn a lot about the flight management system of the UH-60 Mike. It's a very big system, and in ground school, the first month of Black Hawks, you learned how to use it, and you know, you had your instructor, you had your little classroom set up where you practiced using it. But this time, you're literally in the actual aircraft and you are programming it to go fly a mission. So the FMS is going to work off of two things. So you could do a well planned out mission where your IP says, hey, you're picking up a Ranger platoon at this RT, and you're going to take them to this RT, drop them off. You're going to go to this hold-up area, wait, and then you're going to come here and pick the Ranger platoon back up, and we're going to come back. I want you to plan that out tonight. So you go home, you open up your amps and your Falcon View, and you plan that out. You get your time distance heading card, and you put together your mission packet just like you did in BWS. And then right when you get to the classroom, you'll load it on what's called a PIMSA card. That goes into the Black Hawk, and it uploads into the flight management system, and it immediately loads the route you built. So that is a way to do it. My IP was very big on hasty planning. So what we would do is we would do rough kind of planning the night before on, like, we'll probably go to this RT and this RT and you know, pick some people up. And when we got there the next day, we'd do our table talk and everything, and we'd go out to the aircraft and we would build our routes inside of the Black Hawk. So we wouldn't do the whole like building the route the night before on amps or Falcon View. We would just go straight into the Black Hawk and actually build it using the multi-function slew controller and using our MFDs, and we would build it that way. Since I'm more familiar with doing it that way, I actually prefer it that way. I have done it both ways. I've just done it far more the hasty way, so I like that a lot better. And it makes sense. You get in the aircraft and you build your route in the aircraft. So you learn a lot about the flight management system. You can do a ton of things with it. So we talked about route building. One other thing you'll do is you'll do in-flight calculations. So most of you know by now that when you're doing an air assault mission, everything is 100% dependent on when the ground force commander wants to be wheels down on the X. So the air assault standard is going to be plus or minus 30 seconds. You'll hear that a lot. So when you're in MST phase, that's the standard that these IPs will hold you to, is plus or minus 30 seconds. My IP freaking would give a shit if we didn't have wheels down within 10 seconds. Plus or minus 10 seconds. Obviously, the standard is plus or minus 30 seconds, but, you know, he just went that, he was that, had that high of standards for us. So, and he led by example. The first day of MSTs, he was like, I guarantee you, I can put the wheels down with no seconds to spare. Literally, we'll land it at 1300. Plus or minus no seconds. Literally, 1300, 00. That's when the wheels will go down. And literally, we were kind of like, okay, yeah, sure. And then I'm thinking like, there ain't no way. There's so many variables that can happen between here and there. And he did it. He no shit did it. Now, he's got 40 years of flying under his belt, but he did it. It was pretty cool. And honestly, he showed us that it's possible. And if he could do that, we could do plus or minus 30 seconds. And I would say towards the end of MSTs, we were doing it. The UH-60 mic has some phenomenal systems on it. So when you are en route, if you are the PC, you're constantly looking at what your current estimated time of arrival is and what ground speed you need to be at in order to get to the X when you want to get there. So estimated time of arrival, you go into your calculation mode of your FMS, and there is a way to get your ETA, and it will grab your current ground speed, and it will grab how much further you have to go, and it will spit out, if everything stays the same, you will get there at this time. So if it's much later or much earlier, you know, oh, I need to make an adjustment. There's also a function in the FMS where you can go in and say, okay, if I move at this ground speed, we'll say 100 knots, what time will I arrive at my destination? And it will give you the time. So you can go back and forth from those functions using the FMS. You can figure out what speed you need to be at, and if you're too fast or too slow to get there in order to make the time. Now remember, when you're doing air assault, you don't want to be too early, but you also don't want to be late. You got to be there right on time when you say you're going to be there, because there's things that are going on like preparation, preparatory fires. There might be some indirect fires to prep the target before the infantry guys get there, and you don't want to be later because you're slowing the ground forces, the maneuver elements down. They're planning off of when you said that you were going to get them there. So it's all very important. Time is critical in air assault missions. So talked about the FMS. Talked about hasty flight planning. Another thing you'll do in MSTs, you're not really graded on it, but I know my IP taught us how to use this function, and he was big about it. So it's called dynamic in-flight update. So dynamic in-flight update is when you're operating within 3,000 pounds of your max gross weight OGE. So typically, if you're at sea level and the conditions are very normal, your max gross weight for the UH-60 mic is going to be 22,000 pounds. If your max gross weight is 22,000 pounds at standard conditions, when you get up to conditions like, 5,000 PA and the temperature's 30 degrees Celsius, those numbers start to drop from 22,000 a little bit. So maybe it goes from 22,000 to 20,000 pounds gross weight. Or if you get higher than that and you're operating in really high altitudes, hot environments like Afghanistan, you could go down to even 19,000 pounds max gross weight. So in this phase, this is something that my IP really harped on, because it gave us an opportunity to go out to these RTs and simulate some of these conditions. And the FMS will tell you, you can input, hey, our temperature is X and our max gross weight that we have is X, and it will spit out, hey, these are your torques you're going to be pulling at OGE, IGE, and you can know if these certain maneuvers that you have to do for your mission, if you're going to actually be able to do them. Because if you're operating within 3,000 pounds of your max gross weight, then in your high, hot, and heavy, you might have to do a rolling takeoff or a level acceleration takeoff. You may not have the power to do some of the things that you normally could. Now, typically when you're training every single day and everything's perfect, you don't have that problem. But when you get deployed and you go to war, there's all these things. You're going to be in some really shitty conditions and you're going to be asked to do certain things. And if you don't go through the thorough process of putting information into these FMSs and figuring out if you can truly do this and calculating if you can truly do this, you're going to get yourself in bad situations. You're going to burn up an engine, you're going to have to take things to lockout and use your contingency power, and even then you might strand a freaking helicopter on a mountaintop. If you're lucky. I mean, you can ball one up very easily and not come home. So these are very important things. So your max, so you're going to use your FMS to do these calculations. So, and you're going to do this when you're operating within 3,000 pounds of max allowable gross weight OGE, an increase of 1,000 feet pressure altitude, and an increase of 5 degrees Celsius based on your original PPC. And then when you do these updates, the things you're going to be looking for is max torque available, so what will you pull, or what can you pull, max allowable gross weight OGE, torque required to hover max gross weight OGE and IGE, and then the aircraft gross weight. So you're going to confirm your gross weight. And that's called the dynamic in-flight update. And you use your FMS to figure all those things out. Another thing that you can use the FMS for, and you'll learn in this phase, is fuel management. So there's a lot of cool things you can use the FMS for, that you get numbers off your PPC and you can put put it in before you leave the airfield, or you can actually do a fuel check on your app or on your E6B, and then you can put the numbers you got into the FMS to make fuel predictions and fuel calculations. So yeah, that should give you guys a decent summary of kind of some things that you guys are going to be focusing on in MSTs. It's also very IP driven. So it's safe to assume you'll definitely hit a lot of these topics in MSTs, but it's also very dependent on your IP. This was, what I just talked about is what my IP wanted to focus on. So I'm going to leave you guys with my multi-ship story and some of the cool things we got to do in MSTs. So got to fly multi-ship one day in MSTs, and it was a lot of fun. Started off in trail, flew to 1RT, and then we switched up and I got to fly lead to the next RT. And it was a lot of fun. I will say that flying multi-ship in the Black Hawk, I thought it was much easier because you can use your flight director and your autopilot systems to be far more accurate with your formation flying. Especially if you're in lead. Being in trail's a little harder because you're basing everything off of the aircraft in front of you. But when you're in lead, there's no aircraft in front of you. So yeah, you're in constant communication with the aircraft behind you, but you can set your flight director for your altitude and your speed that you want to maintain, and pretty chill, to be honest with you. So I thought it was much easier, to be honest with you. Flying multi-ship's always pretty cool, especially if you got a good group that you enjoy flying with. And flying multi-ship, at least with my IP and the other IP we flew with that day, it was really chill. Low threat, just went out there and had some fun. The other thing I want to talk about in MSTs that I thought was really fun was kind of got to go out one day and just do some freestyling. And I use the term freestyling. It's a term that I use, but it's basically when your IP just transfers the controls and says, "Hey, have some fun. Go test the aircraft's performance out. Do some things you want to do in it." So, went out to a we did our first mission, and we had a little bit of extra time. We were in an NOE box, and my IP was just like, "Hey, go fly towards that field, and I want you to dip down in that field, and then when you get to the edge of it, I want you to do a cyclic climb and come back over and do the same thing back." And it's really cool. I mean, obviously, that doing that type of stuff, flying NOE and doing cyclic climbs, that's what helicopter pilots live for. So it's a lot of fun, especially when you're in the Black Hawk. The day that I'm referring to really built my confidence on how insane of an aircraft the Black Hawk actually is. How fast it can move and how quick it can freaking turn on a dime, and how agile it actually is for such a big, beefy aircraft. It's incredible. My overall opinion on MSTs is I think it's a pretty good phase. But my honest opinion is I think they could expand contact phase to be a little longer. That's just my opinion. I think contact phase is building your fundamentals as a Black Hawk pilot, and if I can recall correctly, I think contact phase is 3 weeks long. And don't get me wrong, I think that's just enough to get some good solid reps in there to get your confidence up. But MSTs is a necessary phase, but I just want to, the contact phase is much more important. So I don't know. I'm not an IP. I don't create the curriculum, so I don't really know where I stand on it. I just think that there is some revisiting that they could do. MSTs was fun, but you're still so new to the Blackhawk. Like BWS, you were in the 72 for like 4 months before you made it to BWS. So you're going to a BWS type phase only having like 3 weeks in the aircraft. So I don't know. That's kind of just my thoughts. They can expand contact a little more. But at the same time, they only have you for a certain amount of time. So the IPs and the curriculum developers, they have a tough job, and I think they try to do everything they can to get us the maximum amount of training and the most efficient amount of time, but it's challenging. But anyways, in the next video, we're going to cover instruments. That's the next phase in the Blackhawk course. So I will see you there. Thank you guys for supporting my channel.